The wind moved like an old ghost across the land, whistling through the tall, dry grass and whispering through the broken boards of Caleb Morgan's ranch house. The land had once been full of life, young calves bawling in the fields, horses galloping by the creek, his wife's laughter drifting out through the open windows. But those sounds were gone now, replaced by the lonely creak of the barn door and the steady groan of the wind. Caleb had outlived everything that made this place home. He stood at the gate, leaning on his rifle, his gray eyes scanning the far horizon where the mountains cut sharp against the evening sky. He'd seen 50 winters come and go, and each one had taken something from him. His youth, his friends, his wife, his hope. It was in that winter, the cruel one of 1865, that something unexpected happened. The snow came down in sheets that year, piling knee-deep across the plains. Most folks in town had packed up for the season, but Caleb stayed behind. He had no one waiting for him anywhere else. He spent his days chopping wood, tending to the few cattle he still had, and talking to his horse, Dusty, just to fill the silence. But that morning, as he was heading back from town with a sack of flour and some coffee beans, he heard it, the cry that would change everything. It wasn't the sound of any animal he knew. It was sharp, desperate, human. He reined Dusty in and listened again. The sound came again, faint but clear, echoing from the ravine beyond the ridge. It was a cry for help. Caleb felt a prickle of unease down his neck. He'd ridden these lands for years and knew how dangerous that ravine could be. The wolves hunted there in packs during the winter, lean and fearless. But something in that cry, high and trembling, made him turn his horse toward the ridge without another thought. The snow was thick and heavy under Dusty's hooves, slowing their climb. The wind tore at Caleb's coat, cutting through the seams like knives. He gritted his teeth and pressed on until he reached the top. When he looked down into the ravine, his stomach turned cold. A pack of wolves, maybe 6 or 7, were circling something small against a fallen log. At first, he thought it was a wounded animal. But then he saw the shape move, a child. She was no older than 8, maybe 9, her skin dark like the land, her black hair tangled and wild. She clutched something broken, a cradle board, split in two, and the snow around her was spattered with blood. Caleb didn't hesitate. He swung his rifle from his saddle and fired a shot into the air. The crack split the silence like thunder, and the wolves turned, snarling, yellow eyes flashing. They didn't scatter. Hunger had driven out their fear. One lunged forward, teeth bared, and Caleb fired again, the wolf dropping mid-stride. Another rushed from the side, leaping for Dusty's leg. Caleb kicked his stirrup hard, catching it in the jaw. Dusty reared and screamed, hooves lashing. Caleb swung his rifle like a club, striking the next wolf across the skull. The fight blurred into noise and motion, growls, gunshots, the bitter stink of gunpowder and blood. The girl screamed once, curling into a ball as snow sprayed around her. Caleb's rifle jammed, and he drew his knife, slashing as another wolf leapt for him. It caught his arm, teeth sinking deep, but he drove the blade home and shoved the body aside. When the last shot echoed through the canyon, the only sounds left were his ragged breathing and the low whimper of the child. He dropped to his knees beside her, panting, blood running down his sleeve. The girl stared at him, her dark eyes wide with terror. When he reached for her, she shrank back, clutching the broken board to her chest. He realized she didn't understand his words when he said, "You're safe now, little one." His voice was hoarse, but he made it gentle, soft as he could. He held out his hand slowly, palm open, the way you'd approach a frightened colt. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, as if she saw something in his eyes she could trust, she reached out and touched his hand. Her fingers were trembling and ice cold. Caleb wrapped her in his coat, lifted her into the saddle, and rode hard for home through the snow. Back at the cabin, he stoked the fire until it roared, its warmth chasing the frost from the room. He sat her near it and poured warm water over her hands, cleaning the cuts. She didn't speak, only watched him warily, her big brown eyes tracking every movement. He could tell from her clothes and the beads around her neck that she was Apache. He'd met their people before, proud, quiet, fierce. He knew they wouldn't take kindly to a white man harboring one of their own, but leaving her out there had never been an option. He made soup from beans and salt pork, fed her small spoonfuls until she stopped shaking. When she fell asleep, he laid her gently in his bed and sat by the fire, watching the snow fall outside. He had lived alone for so long that the sound of another person breathing in his house felt strange, like a dream he didn't trust. Days passed before she spoke a single word. She stayed close to the window, watching the sky at night. When he pointed to the stars and said, "Star," she repeated it softly, her accent lilting, almost musical. He smiled. "That's what I'll call you," he said. "Little star." She didn't understand the words, but she smiled anyway, and in that moment something in Caleb's chest, something that had been cold for years, began to thaw. As the weeks went on, she helped him feed the animals and fetch water. She laughed when he tried to mimic Apache words she taught him, shaking her head at his poor attempts. He carved her a little wooden horse from an old branch, and when he handed it to her, she hugged it close like it was made of gold. That night, she whispered to the stars again, holding the carving in her hands, and Caleb wondered what prayers she was sending into the dark. But peace never lasted long in that country. One morning, Dusty whinnied nervously, and Caleb saw riders approaching from the south, Apache warriors, their faces painted, their eyes cold. He stepped out slowly, rifle slung but not raised. The little girl ran to the doorway, her face lighting up as she recognized one of them. She sprinted across the yard and threw herself into the arms of a tall man with gray braids and a chest full of scars. The man held her tight, his expression hard but relieved. The chief dismounted and walked toward Caleb, his warriors watching closely. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the chief said in rough English, "You saved my daughter." "Why?" Caleb shrugged. "She needed help. Wolves don't care what color a man is." The chief studied him, eyes narrowing. Then he nodded once and placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "You have good heart. I not forget." They took the girl, Little Star, home that day. She looked back at him as they rode away, waving the little wooden horse in her hand. Caleb raised his hat and stood there until they disappeared beyond the ridge. That night, his cabin felt emptier than it had in years. He sat by the fire, the girl's laughter echoing faintly in his memory. For the first time, he realized what it meant to be truly alone. But he was content, in a quiet way. Somewhere out there, a little Apache girl would grow up because he'd been in the right place at the right time. He didn't know that 15 years later, she'd return, not as a frightened child, but as a woman who carried the memory of that night in her heart, and a promise her people had never forgotten. The sun was sinking low over the desert when Caleb heard the sound of hooves, slow, steady, and too many to be travelers passing through. He looked up from his porch, shading his eyes from the golden light, and saw them appear like a vision out of time. A line of riders stretched across the ridge, their silhouettes dark against the fading sun. There must have been a dozen, maybe more, each mounted on a strong, painted horse. Their spears glinted faintly, feathers moving in the wind. But it was the one at the front who drew his eyes and held them still. The woman rode tall and straight, her long hair braided with beads that caught the light. Draped over her shoulders was a wolf pelt, its head resting on her shoulder as if alive. Around her neck hung a necklace of white fangs, each one carved and polished. Her gaze was calm, unflinching, and full of quiet power. Caleb felt his chest tighten, a strange stirring of something half forgotten. He leaned against the porch rail, watching as the riders descended slowly toward the ranch. Dust rose in thin clouds beneath the hooves. The woman halted her horse before him, close enough that he could see the faint scars tracing her cheek, the faint shimmer of recognition in her eyes. She dismounted with a fluid grace and stood tall in front of him, her presence commanding without a word. The other riders waited behind her, silent as the desert stones. Caleb cleared his throat, unsure what to say. It had been years since anyone had ridden this far out to see him. "Evenin'," he said finally, his voice low and rough. "You folks lost." The woman studied him for a long moment, then shook her head. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but certain. "You don't remember me, do you?" He frowned, searching her face. There was something familiar about her eyes, dark, deep, and full of quiet fire. "Can't say I do, ma'am. Should I?" She took a step closer. 15 winters ago, she said slowly, there was snow in the ravine. Wolves came. A little girl cried. Her eyes didn't leave his. "You came too." The breath left his lungs like someone had struck him. He looked at her again, really looked this time, the shape of her face, the calm way she held herself, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her. "Little Star," he whispered, the name falling from his lips before he could stop it. Her lips curved faintly, a ghost of a smile. "That was my name once," she said. "Now I am Chief Nita of the White Stone Apache." Caleb could hardly speak. You're alive." Groan. "I thought." He stopped himself, shaking his head. Look at you. Your father, he'd be proud. Her expression softened, but there was a sadness behind her eyes. My father walks with the ancestors now. But before he died, he told me of the man who saved me. The white man who fought wolves alone. She gestured to her riders. We rode here because a debt remains unpaid. Caleb blinked. Debt? You don't owe me a damn thing. I did what any man should. No, she said quietly. Not every man would. She turned to her people and gave a sharp command in Apache. They dismounted and began unloading bundles from their horses, blankets, tools, food, even a pair of young horses, strong and healthy. Caleb stared, bewildered. What's all this? This is for you, she said. My father swore a life debt. I fulfill it now. Caleb's rough hands trembled slightly as he looked over the supplies. He hadn't had this much food or warmth in years. You don't have to. I do, she interrupted gently. Not because you asked, but because honor demands it. The air between them was quiet for a moment, filled only by the crackle of the small fire her men had started in the yard. The sun had dipped low, and the desert sky burned orange and violet. Nita stood beside him, looking out over the land that stretched endless and empty. You live here alone, she said softly. Why, he chuckled, though there wasn't much humor in it. Ain't got much reason to go anywhere else. My wife's long gone. The cattle too. I suppose I just stayed 'cause I didn't know what else to do. She nodded slowly, as if she understood loneliness better than he could imagine. You gave me life when I had none, she said after a moment. I grew strong because of that day. You fought the wolves for me. Now I fight them for my people. He looked at her, puzzled. Wolves, men, she said simply. Those who steal our land, poison our rivers, hunt us like beasts. I lead my people now against those who take what is not theirs. Some days I win, some days I lose, but I never forget that courage comes from kindness. I learned that from you. The firelight flickered across her face, and Caleb saw not just the fierce warrior she'd become, but the little girl he'd once held in his arms, trembling and cold. Something inside him ached, a mix of pride and sorrow. You turned out just fine, little star, he said quietly. Better than most I've known. That night, the Apache stayed around his ranch, their laughter and songs drifting through the cold desert air. They roasted meat over the fire and sang in their language, songs of memory and gratitude. Caleb sat beside Nita, listening though he couldn't understand the words. Somehow, he didn't need to. He could feel the meaning in his bones. When the songs ended, Nita turned to him and placed something in his hand. It was a necklace, a single wolf fang carved smooth and tied with leather. From the same wolves you killed, she said. A reminder that even the fiercest beasts can be tamed by courage. He ran his thumb over the fang, his throat tightening. I'll keep it close. She smiled softly. You saved a child once. Now you've saved a people. You just didn't know it. They sat in silence after that, the desert stretching endless around them, the stars burning bright overhead. Caleb felt something he hadn't in years, peace. The kind that settles deep and stays. When dawn came, the riders saddled up. Nita stood before him once more, the sun rising behind her like a halo. We leave now, she said. But our paths are bound. If ever you call, the white stone will answer. He nodded slowly, unable to find words. You take care of yourself, chief. She smiled, her eyes gleaming like morning light. I already do. Because of you. He watched them ride away until they became nothing but specks against the bright horizon. The land seemed different now, less empty, less forgotten. He turned and looked at the piles of goods they'd left, but his eyes lingered instead on the horizon where she'd vanished. Later that day, he hung the wolf fang necklace beside the old carving of the wooden horse. He sat by the fire and whispered, Little star, you came back. The wind slipped through the cracks in the walls, carrying the faintest echo of a woman's voice, strong, proud, and distant, answering softly, always. The old ranch felt alive again. The silence was no longer lonely, it was sacred. Caleb knew he would never be forgotten, not as long as her people rode those plains. And somewhere beyond the hills, a young Apache chief led her warriors with the same courage he'd once shown her, a reminder that a single act of kindness can live on long after the man who gave it